Hey everybody, welcome back. If you were told to make this little guy a friend, what would you make? Let's increase those stakes and say if you don't make this guy a friend, he gets smashed. This was the exact predicament I was put in 6 months ago. Allow me to elaborate. We're going to do a little work and talk here. I broke out the tinfoil and tried to get the overall body shape of this creature that I was trying to make. I quickly realized that he was going to be too large to be able to hold up the mass that I was trying to make with just clay and this tinfoil. I scrapped that idea and broke out the heavy-duty wire to make a framework to build upon. Back to the story that got us here. My girlfriend couldn't sleep one night and came downstairs and decided she was going to create something using the sculpting clay that she had brought over. She sat quietly for over an hour sculpting. I even gave her some tools to help her with her sculpting endeavor. After she was done, she presented me with this cute little blue dinosaur with a heart in his hands. I was thoroughly impressed. I've never sculpted before, but I don't think given the same time frame, I could have come up with something that was as cute and well done as that was. The next thing that came out of her mouth kind of surprised me. She asked if she could smash it now that it was done. My initial reaction was absolutely not. Once I completed this bird's nest of wires, I wrapped it in some tin foil so I didn't have to use so much clay in the end. I rolled out some clay to cover the tin foil and wires to start letting this thing take shape. As an artist, as a maker, as a creator, I could never conceivably smash or break something that I just made. Something that I put my heart and soul and time and effort into creating, and then just turn around and break it. She does not share the same value in her own art, or at least most of it. She created it, and now that she's created it and enjoyed it for that moment, it can go. There was a bit of back and forth as to why I think she shouldn't destroy it. After a few minutes, she relented, and we threw it in the oven and baked it so it couldn't easily be smashed. Now that it was hardened, she asked if she could smash it with a hammer. I couldn't catch a break here. My answer again was still a resounding no. She said it would break a lot easier now instead of it just smushing. After I convinced her a second time not to smash it, I had to run upstairs and grab something, and when I came back, the little dinosaur was sitting on my desk with this note. Make me a friend or I will die. What a heavy weight to put on somebody's shoulders. I continued to add material to his arms and shoulders to make sure that he looked proportional and didn't have these long, scrawny arms. If you're liking this video so far, please consider giving it a like and subscribe so I can continue making more fun content for you. Now, back to the story. A week went by and I hadn't started sculpting anything. She would walk over and occasionally tap on the note on my desk, just to remind me that I needed to get moving. After a couple weeks, I snatched up the dinosaur and put him away, so she couldn't get to him anymore, and I could buy myself a little bit of time to finish up some other projects before I started that. And here we are, almost 6 months later, finally getting to it. I cut a slit for his mouth, as well as giving him a couple eye holes, but it was time to start working on his legs. They needed a lot of attention. After looking at his arms and how long they were and comparing them to something like a gorilla, he needed to have legs that were at least half the size of his arms. And I definitely didn't add enough wire to work with. At this rate, his legs were gonna stick out straight in front of him, which looked terrible. Especially once I added the toes. Gross. He looked so weird. I made an executive decision and chopped the toes off, and then I put them on his head like an axolotl. If my girlfriend had seen this during this stage, she would have told me to lean into the axolotl look. Definitely not what I was going for. I didn't really know what I wanted to make going into this. I knew I wanted some sort of large protector-like figure with big arms and a big broad chest, but other than that, It was kind of just going with the flow. I watch a lot of North of the Border here on YouTube. I was hoping to let Adam's sculpting ability just flow through me to make something great. I'm sorry, Adam. I may have failed you. I took a few lumps of clay and rolled them into large sausages and squished and bent them into the stumps that were his legs. I was able to salvage the toes and stick those into the front and blend those back in. Thankfully, the amount of clay that I had added in there was able to support the amount of weight. Now that he actually had a real pair of legs and he could stand on his own, he needed a butt. You heard it right. If nothing else, he's gonna have a nice pair of cheeks. Just look at them. They're glorious. At this point, I had something resembling a gorilla body, but with a turtle head. I was gonna start heading down the turtle road and giving him a shell, but for some reason, I decided against it. This is what happens when you don't have a solid plan going in. His head shape needed more character. It was just oval and boring. The idea of giving him some sort of beak, like a bird, popped into my head, and I just went for it. Remember, this was a fly by the seat of my pants build. I was just going with what feels right. Now that the beak was done, I added some pre-baked eyeballs into those empty eye sockets that he has. I added a little bit more material and blended that in to try to give some sort of eyebrow ridge or kind of an eyelid. Once that was all in place, I had a bunch of pre-baked claws that I decided not to use. I wanted him to look friendly, but the claws made him look kind of menacing. Instead, I tried to incorporate them onto his body. I thought maybe he could have a row of spikes that would go down his back, but that didn't look right to me either. I did, however, like the idea of having some sort of spine element, or head crest, or something like that. I was referencing different pictures of dinosaurs that had a similar feature, and so I was kind of just heading in that direction. At first, it kind of looked like he had his hair slicked back into a mohawk. So I flattened it out, which gave it a little more height and made it look more like a crest instead of like a cool greaser dude. I sat there for a while looking at him, and he needed something else. I looked at a few Pokémon characters to try to get some inspiration, and since this character was already leaning into the gorilla monkey look with a beak, I thought maybe he could have a tail, that this would balance out the figure a little more. I wrapped some clay around some thin armature wire and pushed that into his body just above his butt. Brown, probably not the best choice. I was just trying to use up the colors that might not get used. I blended the tail into the rest of his body, making sure not to ruin them cheeks. I added some textures into the crest on his head, as well as adding one of those pre-baked claws onto the bridge of his beak to give him a horn. Something about it just worked. The tail was a little too cute for me. I had all these extra pre-baked claws, so why not give him a club tail with spikes? I added a little extra clay and began pushing these spikes into the end of his tail. I regret using the thinner armature wire. There's a lot of bounce and play in that tail, so I had to position it and try not to move it a whole lot, because once this gets baked, there's a high likelihood of breaking and cracking if it gets jostled too much. Before heading off to painting, I wanted to add some sort of texture to his body. My girlfriend added spots to her dinosaur, so I figured I'd carry that over into my creature. The last and final thing that I decided to add before painting this were dew claws on his front legs. It became a hook that the little dinosaur could wrap its tail around while it was sitting in the palm of my creature's hand. She didn't know her dinosaur was going to be able to sit in my creature's hand, so this was all going to be a surprise for her. Now that all the sculpting was done, I put it in the oven and baked it to perfection. I took it outside and sprayed it down with a filler primer. As much as I could smooth out my imperfections, this was still my first time sculpting, so it still wasn't perfect. The filler primer helped out a bit, but it was what it was. Once that was dry, I primed it white because I wanted a very bright paint job. I use Pokémon characters as a large inspiration for a lot of this, so I decided to lean into that kind of a paint job. I went for a base color of green. Not typically a color that I would start with, but it just felt right. However, it did not go on as anticipated, so I had to do multiple coats and touch-ups. Since my guy had a weird beak on this gorilla body, I really wanted that piece to stand out. I tested a couple different colors against that green, and this light blue was the clear winner. And then came the difficult decision. What color do I paint the horn and the crest? I went back and forth with a couple different colors, and this yellow really stood out against that green. So his horn, the crest, and all the spikes on his tail were going to be this bright yellow color. I held off painting the crest for a moment and decided that I was going to use the same blue on his beak to paint all the spots on his body to kind of tie everything together. At this point, the green color of his body was looking very one note. I used the same yellow that I did on the horns to give a very light dry brushing across his whole body to give his skin some color variation. Now that all the other elements were squared away, I felt comfortable painting his crest. Once that was painted and dried, it looked boring. It needed to be punched up a bit. Not before I knock over my full cup of water all over my desk. It's not one of my projects without a fun mishap. After I cleaned everything up, I got out an orange and a red color, and I dry brushed just the top of the crest from orange to red, just to give that nice gradient and to make it a little more dynamic and give it a little more personality. I also did the same to his horn and to the tips of his tail. There was one little spot where I slipped with the brush earlier on his chest, so I decided to use that and drew a little blue heart over the top of that. I can give you one guess who really liked that addition. And with that, I was done. Let's get it onto the turntable. My girlfriend was thrilled when she saw the final product. She was happy and sad that she doesn't get to smash her dinosaur anymore, but he now has a friend. This being my first sculpting experience, it definitely was an eye-opener. I would like to sculpt something again, but next time I am going to have a plan going in. I don't know what I'm going to make, but if you have some ideas of something you think I should try to sculpt, leave a comment below. Thank you for coming on this sculpting journey with me. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.